So I can two examples of
Hello, everybody, and hello, Ben, in the control room. Maybe we can start the YouTube stream now, if you don't mind. This is David Dublin Foltz from the Aspen Institute. Welcome to all of you for showing up. Congratulations for showing up, despite the howling winter fury outside, which by Washington standards is a complete knockdown blizzard. By everyone else's standards, it's probably a snow flurry that is going to turn into slush and rain within a couple of hours. But thank you all for making it out, not only for a breakfast meeting, but for a breakfast meeting under really, really, truly inclement weather conditions. So we're here today to hear from Edith Asibey about what advocates need to know to spark and sustain action, as you all know. What you may not know is that Edith was really present at the creation of the work on advocacy, planning, and evaluation that we do here at the Aspen Institute. Edith and her colleague Justin Van Fleet worked together and worked with me 15 years ago? 13, 2005, I think we started. In 2006, we worked together on the first of the web-based tools that the Aspen Planning and Evaluation Program created, called Continuous Progress. And it was really a wonderful collaboration and a wonderful effort to pull together what we knew and what we thought we knew about advocacy and how to evaluate it at that very early moment in the development of this field. So I'm very grateful to Edith for that collaboration and for staying in touch over the years as she moved on and moved out, married, moved to Brazil, where she ran communications for UNICEF in that very challenging environment. And we'll be hearing more from Edith about some of what she learned and did in that context. And now, of course, she has returned to the United States. And like all the cool people, she lives in Brooklyn, and naturally her husband is now running one of the coolest restaurants in Brooklyn. So you should go up and check it out. You're going to give it a 4-star review by in the course of your remarks, I assume, Edith. So next time up, anybody can enjoy food at John's fantastic restaurant, which is called, once again? Lower Line. Okay, so for those of you joining us from New York, check it out immediately. Edith, I know that is the most important thing in your world right now, that and your wonderful son. But tell us more. We're looking forward to hearing more from you about this work and what implications it might have for those of us who think about evaluating advocacy, evaluating social media strategies, and most of all, making certain that those social media strategies become good habits. Edith, over to you.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everyone. I wanted to see if we could do a quick introduction, and again, acknowledging and thanking you for being here this morning. Indeed, I am a New Yorker, so this to me is just regular weather, subway weather, but I really, really appreciate you guys making it here. We also have folks online, so we're trying to figure out now how we can also get them engaged. So I wanted to acknowledge and thanks the folks who are watching the live stream. So perhaps if you don't mind going around the table to do a quick set of introductions. Thank you.
Morning. Morning. I am Keith Lindblom with the Pew Charitable Trusts.
Hi, Genevieve Boudelier from the Peace and Security Funders Group.
Hello, Mariah from Center for Evaluation Innovation.
Dennis Poplin, Spitfire Strategies.
Susanna Delaplane, Aspen Planning and Evaluation Program.
Mary Hodges from PATH.
Hi, I'm Mike Conathan with the Aspen High Seas Initiative.
I am Ted Chamberlain with the Pew Charitable Trusts.
Hi, I'm Lana Wong. I had the pleasure of working with Edith at the Education Commission.
Hi, I'm Nora Eigenbrot, and I'm with the Phi Beta Kappa Society.
Hi, I'm Nicole Mazer with American Jewish Committee.
I'm Rich Carter with Wellspring Philanthropic Fund.
I'm Alex Gabriel with Child Trends and APEP alum.
Alex, welcome back. Good to have you here. Edith.
Thank you. So that was also a little stretching exercise to pass the mic. And so the first thing I wanted to do is tell you a little bit of how I got here, to this moment, and to what I'm going to share with you guys today. I have worked in global philanthropy. I was, until 2013, the Chief Communication Officer at the Atlantic Philanthropies, which is the largest limited light foundation in the world, meaning it spent itself out of existence after $8 billion in social justice grant making. I've also worked in nonprofits in the United States and abroad. And most recently, I've worked for one of the largest humanitarian organizations in the world, which is UNICEF. I'm currently teaching at NYU a course in digital engagement for the master's students in public administration, nonprofit management, and public policy. So my experiences and what I have been doing most of my life have related to trying to get more people to care about the issues that the organizations I work with worked on. How do we get more people engaged in those issues? How do we influence their opinions positively? And how do we sustain their engagement over time? It has been quite the challenge, and I think the advent, certainly, of digital and social media has made things easier in terms of ability to reach and engage, but it also made things harder in terms of the dilution of information and the really, really high volume of content and information that any of us has access to on any given day. So that is the starting point. And what I'm going to share with you today, and we're going to just quickly show you the agenda for the day, is first I would like to share the story of two engagement initiatives that I worked on recently that were heavily powered by digital data, and discuss with you the decisions we made and the course corrections we made because of the data that we had access to. Then I would like to speak briefly about behavior design and what does behavior design have to do with any of our conversations around engagement and bringing people into our causes. I will introduce you to an approach, a very, very unique approach to behavior design and behavior change called tiny habits. I'm going to try to connect all the dots with your help, and then I would really like to leave time for us to have an open conversation. Feel free to interrupt if you like, if you have any clarifying questions. I do have quite a bit of content, but by all means, feel free to interrupt to ask clarifying questions, and I'm really, really looking forward to our discussion. I did want to start with a question for you, which is, could you share with me briefly what have been some of the biggest obstacles you or your organization has faced when trying to engage people on your issues, when you're trying to bring them into the causes that you work on? And if you're in philanthropy, also, of course, for your grantees, what are some of the biggest obstacles? You could just kind of shut out, some of the difficulties that you guys have faced.
So working in ocean issues, particularly high seas issues, which we're talking about areas that are more than 200 miles away from shore, it's very difficult to get people to engage in understanding something that they can't see and touch and experience firsthand.
So the difficulty of understanding something that is far, that is removed, like ocean issues, for instance, something that is not part of their daily lives. Another challenge?
I would say probably Keith and I may share some of the same challenges working at the Few Charitable Trusts, which is that we cover many, many different areas, which is wonderful because we can have an influence in many areas. And even though we're reaching different audiences with different messages, it's all bound by a common theme, which is that it's very results-based and very data-oriented. Mm-hmm. It's almost run like a business in a way in terms of philanthropy. But that does make it challenging sometimes to sustain that engagement because you're moving from project to project and audience to audience. So finding those pathways and to prioritize and
so the diversity of issues within an organization, and how then, from the perspective of your audience, do you think that affects them in terms of clarity in understanding?
I think it can, yes.
Okay. Awesome. Any other obstacles you'd like to share now? Yes.
I think translating the impact of what you're doing can be really tricky. I work for a membership organization. One of our members works on nuclear issues, and so it's hard to translate to general audiences like this very small impact when nuclear issues are humongous.
Right. So how to, and I'm just repeating in case the people in the live stream can't hear, how do we translate the impact of what we're doing? And in fact, as David mentioned, I did invest quite a bit of time working on how do we know whether our communications and advocacy efforts are being effective? How do we know if we're reaching the right people? And some of the examples I bring today are going to speak to that. So how are we doing on engagement? And starting with, I'm using a very simple definition of engagement, and I'm using it from an organizational perspective because, we're all here representing our organizations. And I'm speaking, when I refer to engagement, I refer to the actions that people take voluntarily as a result of your organization's prompt. So any action, lato sense that people will take by choice because you asked them to, or because the organization prompted them in some way. So how this is an area that has getting more and more attention and is being studied more and more. And how do you guys think we're doing as a field, as a nonprofits more broadly, and social change organizations? How do you think we're doing on engagement? Do you think we're being successful?
I think that we're much better on reach than we are on engagement, and that's always been the distinction that we've tried to draw with clients, and I know you have too.
There is some data, and I will focus particularly on one piece of data that pertains to emails, because emails have been around a while and they're not going anywhere. And so they have a lot more. It's probably the one digital tactic that has the most data available. And this is one piece of information for you to reflect upon. In 2017, this is from the MNR benchmarks, e-benchmark reports. It's an annual report that the MNR group releases, comparing nonprofits across sectors, and it's a very large group of nonprofits that participate. 29% of all email subscribers to environmental nonprofits completed an advocacy action at least once. This is environmental nonprofits, 27%. Of those, only 8% completed an action 3 or more times in the year. We could debate how good this is, but the point is environmental groups are the best in life. This is the best. They're the top performers on this metric across sectors. So the rest of us who don't work on environmental issues are doing worse. And so when I look at this, and I've been in management a long time, and so when I look at this, I look at resources invested and resources wasted. Because if only 8% of the people who chose to be following our content are actually acting more than once, we could ponder, what is happening with everyone outside of the groups that are actually, of the people who are in our email database. So this is just a point of reflection, and the sector is more or less aware of this. But it really brings to me the question that I had when I look at this data and I look at my own work critically is, can we do better? Because we have very limited resources, most of us. So how can we improve? And why is it that only 8% of the best performers, for the ones who are the best performers, take action? So I would like to share 2 ways by which we try to address this work. And both examples are from my work at UNICEF, and they both happen in Brazil. The first one pertains to the Zika virus crisis. Do you guys remember the Zika virus crisis? Hopefully it didn't affect you. I was in the middle of it, so I have very, very vivid memories. But what do you guys remember about it? It was, late 2015 and through 2016 primarily.
And if I can encourage folks who want to answer to use the mics that are around, that'll make it easier for our folks who are following along on the web. What I remember is that it threatened the participation of many athletes from around the world in the Olympics, which were being hosted by Brazil. And of course, it was a major public health crisis within the country, but there was concerns for everyone who might be coming to Brazil about where the infection was, what the impacts would be on them. And within Brazil, of course, what I guess was a full-on epidemic of encephalitis among, sorry, not of encephalitis, microcephaly among infants.
Right. So that is so the Zika virus crisis was sudden. It certainly felt sudden. It reached a point, the Ministry of Health in Brazil declared an emergency, a public health emergency about in October of 2015. The World Health Organization recognized it as a global public health emergency in February of 2016. So the couple of things you should know about Zika, if you are not too familiar with it, is that it is a virus that is transmitted through a mosquito. This mosquito, I could talk a lot about this mosquito, the mosquito is called Aedes aegypti. It's not going anywhere, was there before, continues to be there as of today. The mosquito also carries other diseases, in addition to Zika, such as dengue fever, and another one, lovely, called chikungunya. They're all pretty bad, but they all manifest in different ways. So we are UNICEF. We are in Brazil since 1950. UNICEF in Brazil is present in 9 cities around the country and has pretty robust programs. So we are called by the Ministry of Health to help the response. Clearly, the government of Brazil led the response very competently, and we are called to support that response. So what we found, the first thing we did as UNICEF is look at where the crisis was most serious. Because 80+% of people who had the virus were asymptomatic, so you did not know if you had Zika most of the time. And if people who did got, light fevers, a little bit some rashes, so many people did not seek medical help. So it was really difficult to know, how many people were infected. So the way by which public health specialists look at the prevalence of a disease that is transmitted by a vector like a mosquito is to where is the mosquito, right? Where the mosquito is prevalent. So the red dots are where the mosquito was primarily, which, as you can tell, is the northeast primarily of Brazil, which is one of the poorest areas of the country, unsurprisingly. So we, as UNICEF, look at this and we say, okay, where do we work, right? So I showed you this is the mosquito, where the mosquito was, and now the pink and green areas, which are the northeast and the Amazon, is where UNICEF's programs are happening primarily. UNICEF is present in over 1,000 of the 5,500 municipalities in Brazil, but the core of the work happens in the Northeast and the Amazon. So the first insight we have when we look at this data as an organization is that there is an 84% overlap between where the mosquito was most present and where UNICEF works. So that called for us for a ground response. Right, we know how to do this. We have very strong relationship with the government. Brazil is a federal country, so similar to us here in the U.S., local, state, and federal. We had very, very strong relationship at the local level as well as state level. And so we start what, will be, may think of as a traditional public health response in terms of, getting more people aware of what's happening, helping them figure out how to protect themselves and all on the ground. However, we also had a very strong team working digitally, and this was our first insight. We go to top management and we say, there is an opportunity to respond to this crisis also digitally. Brazil is 5th in the world, where it was in 2016, in internet connectivity. and look at the number of how many people were connected to the internet in 2016. So obviously now it's even more. And how many of them are on Facebook in 2016. So we already had over half of the population on Facebook. That was significant. And so we look at that and we say, how can we incorporate, digital elements and digital listening to our response? So what it is that we did. In planning a digital response, we started by where you must always start, well, in my opinion, in any response, which is by listening. And we figured out a way, several ways, by which we could understand what were people talking about, not UNICEF followers, not people in our who were already in our UNICEF social media, digital media world. What are Brazilians more broadly talking about online pertaining to Zika? Who is doing the talking? Where are they? What are the demographics who are actually engaged in these conversations? How can we, based on this information, engage people to what was the behavior that we were seeking? What was the action to protect themselves and their families and their communities from the virus? And I do want to stress those three things: themselves, their families, and their communities. And there were different measures to take to go, to make sure that you were also protecting others, people other than yourselves. And how could we use what we were learning to shape this campaign and future ones? So we see the opportunity to respond digitally. We set out some research questions about what it is that we wanted to know. And this is all happening while we were doing our ground response. I'm not going to talk about the ground response in the interest of time, but it's very, very important that I stress this digital response was not done in isolation of a ground response. They were complementary. And that's, I think, is very important to stress. So we look at all of this, we have these questions, and here is the biggest deal for us. We partnered with Facebook globally in something that Facebook had never done before, to our knowledge, which was to give us anonymized, aggregated data about what it is that people were talking about when it pertained to Zika. We also partnered with Google for this, with the same thing, and with Twitter in a lesser way, and I'll explain now why. Because Facebook and Google are closed platforms. Do you guys know what that means? In other words, you can't listen, you can't monitor what's happening on Facebook because the majority of the pages, be it individual pages like us here, are closed pages. So I cannot know what Edwin is saying or what Mike is saying because they're not my friends on Facebook unless they have public pages. I can tell what Lana is saying because she is my friend on Facebook, and so is David. And so it is very limited what one can do in terms of digital listening, digital monitoring on Facebook, unless Facebook lets you, which they did in this case. And that was really a breakthrough for us. Same thing with Google. I don't know what you're searching. I don't know what Dennis is searching for, but Google does. Twitter is an open platform. So there's much more you can do, with resources available to monitor Twitter. And as in terms of, you can't have a closed Twitter account. You can block people, like I know President Trump and other people do sometimes, but you cannot, block your own account. Meaning, so I can see what folks are posting. So we use these three platforms. I'm going to give a couple of examples, primarily from Facebook and Twitter. And we use those insights to then craft messages that will boost engagement and help people with what we wanted, which was to take action to protect themselves, their families, and their communities. So here, what I'm going to start showing is some of the data. So on Twitter, we were able to do a digital listening exercise that took us over the span of 1 year, because we wanted to understand when people started talking about it and how the talk evolved. What you're going to see, and it's going to move fast, so you have to pay attention, is the mentions on Twitter of Zika, chikungunya, and dengue, basically the diseases carried by the mosquito, because we also wanted to understand were people worried about the other diseases the mosquito carries, over a span of a year. The red dots, the green dots are Portuguese. Green dots Portuguese, yellow dots Spanish, red dots English. Green Portuguese, red English, yellow Spanish. So now I'm going to show you the evolution. I thought I was going to show you. There you go. This is over 1 year. Now we're December 2015, January 2016. February 2016, when the World Health Organization declares a crisis, a public health emergency. And this is March. So what do you guys saw? What did you see, excuse me? What did you see on that?
Definitely Brazil was at the forefront and sustained that conversation, whereas the rest of the world had kind of blips.
So Brazil was at the kind of first in the conversation and sustained it, while others, yes, go ahead.
I also noticed the northeast part of Brazil, which you were saying was really the target audience of this, was a lot less prevalent than the southeast and other areas.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It's probably a function of, I mean, you said only 50% of the country has Facebook, and if the northeast part is the poorest, they're probably, the ones that are not on Facebook.
Yes, so you were, so tell me your name again, I'm sorry. Rich, that's right. Rich is saying that, he noticed a discrepancy in terms of, within Brazil, there seemed to be less conversations in the Northeast, which is the poorest, but was also where the crisis was most prevalent. And so he was just commenting that may have to do with access to, social media. So for us as a global organization, UNICEF is in 191 countries. We quickly realized that this was not a Brazil problem in terms of a digital response, that we also needed to closely coordinate with colleagues and offices from the countries in which people were having these conversations. But the majority of our response was led from Brazil. However, we provided monitoring data for the entire Latin American region. So this is something that we were able to do on Twitter. Another example, do you guys know what this is? I know it looks a little bit like a psychedelic dream I may have had, and then I woke up and did this, but it's not. This is on Twitter. This is a network relationship map. So it's a network relationship map. The red dot, there is a red, somewhat of a big red dot in the middle, and the words Emin Saúde, which means Ministry of Health. That is the Twitter account of the Brazilian Ministry of Health. This is a network relationship map that shows you how people were engaged around Zika, the actual word Zika, on Twitter. And what you see there is that those dots represent accounts of people who are engaging with the content on Twitter provided by the Ministry of Health. So the reason the majority of the dots are red, and there are all those lines connecting the dots, is because people are interacting with content from the main dot, which is the Ministry of Health, and in turn, they're sharing their content with others. All of those other peripheral dots that you see, green, blue, yellow, they are everyone else. So UNICEF, big moment of humble recognition for us as an organization. We were one of those tiny dots up there somewhere that I couldn't even find. But we are up there. What does this mean? And this is really, really important for each and every one of us. That we could have been screaming up there in one of those little dots, and UNICEF had a big following on Twitter. We had about 350,000 followers. It wasn't like we were irrelevant, but we could have been there saying this is important, you have to protect yourself, this is important. But what people are engaging with is with the Ministry of Health and their content. So an influence, this is an influence map. It's relative to the issue and is relative, and is not necessarily connected to the number of followers you have. This has to do with how influential any given account is at any given point on a given issue. So for us as an organization, and I say this with the most profound respect for, and not knowing all of you personally, but I'm saying knowing our sector, we do have a tendency to really think of our channels as critically important, and we're completely missing the giant red dot that is to the right or to the left or above us. So this is why digital listening is important, because in this case, we realized that the Ministry of Health was the key partner for us to engage in content. This was Twitter, very different situation on Facebook. So it also changes by channel. What were people talking about? They wanted to know about the symptoms, because again, Zika is mostly asymptomatic. So people were very confused as to how do you know if you have it, how to fight this mosquito, how to control the breeding grounds. And there were a lot of rumors because people did not know, were not clear on how do you get Zika. Is it only through the mosquito? Can you get it through water? Is it through air? Then later there was confirmed that it could also be transmitted sexually. And that was another big deal for the country and more. On quickly going through Facebook, as I said, Facebook provided us with anonymized, aggregated data. So I did not know what any of us, any person specifically was saying, but we knew what, people in Brazil were saying about Zika. And this just shows you, this is actually a very high volume of interactions for a 3 or so month period. And for us, the way we interpreted this is that we could tell that the conversation was very much alive. There were spikes, and the spikes sometimes coincided with news, such as, it can be transmitted sexually. But also on Facebook, a lot of rumors. So we were very clear from this moment, not before, that not only we had to address the clear information, but also the information that was correct, but also dispel rumors. So these are some of the things that people were talking about, just to give you an example that, or just a sense that people were indeed concerned with the other diseases as well. Dengue can be fatal, and dengue fever has been around for a long time and is very serious. But also protection, how to protect ourselves. That was, in that sense, what people were asking on Twitter and Facebook were similar. However, on Facebook, we could go further. And I'm going to quickly go through some of the demographic information we could ascertain. We saw that the majority of people were, in reproductive age, which is not, that was somewhat expected because the most serious consequence of Zika was that babies were being born with microcephaly, and other neurological disorders that were very, very serious. So as you can imagine, for us as a children's rights organization, this was absolutely critical to us, not only to help prevent this, but also to ensure that the children born with microcephaly had their rights guaranteed. And it was really, there were a lot of rumors and a lot of negative feelings, around the children. And so we wanted to understand who was talking about it, but also make sure that as much as we talk about protection, we also talked about the children and the rights and the respect that they deserved, the children who were born with microcephaly. This was a huge insight. Everybody was talking to women, but turns out that a lot more people on Facebook who were talking about Zika were men, and nobody was talking to them. Because we were all talking to women in reproductive age, and we were all talking particularly to pregnant women. Or women, who were planning to be pregnant. Hence, what David was talking about, the athletes. The athletes, who were planning to go to Brazil. This is what I'm sharing with you is, the first half of 2016. The Olympics were in August of 2016. So you had a lot of female athletes, understandably concerned about how would this affect them, as well as male athletes not knowing, if they could carry it and then transmit it, as they could, sexually, through their partners. And so for us, realizing that men were an important audience was a huge, huge insight. One of the things we did in terms of our ground response was that we were doing focus groups, and for that we did, I personally went to the Northeast, to a city called Recife, where Zika was highly, highly prevalent. And we met with pregnant women, in focus groups to just better understand, how this was being experienced by them. And I will never forget, it was actually an adolescent pregnant woman who told us, I cannot hear another thing about Zika. I just want to live my pregnancy. I just want to be left alone. So pregnant women were being overloaded with content and with advice and with suggestions of how they should take care of themselves and their bodies. And, no one, neither us, we're talking to men. The other thing was the majority, this is on Facebook, of people were accessing on mobile, much more than the actual, average of users, which was at the country around 46% accessing Facebook on mobile, yet 84% were accessing information about Zika on mobile. So which meant that everything we had to do had to be designed for mobile. And in 2016, for us, that was not a given, and it was not obvious. So here is one example of what happened and how we addressed it. So with all this information, we basically redesigned and recrafted the majority, if not all, of our messages based on insights like the ones I described. And here is one example. So this is a post in Portuguese, naturally, about protection. And what is highlighted in the blue rectangle are just the main stats, which are reach and engagement. Engagement on Facebook is measured by the combined number of reactions, meaning likes, cry, haha, whatever, angry, comments and shares. So this is one post. We reached 58,000 people, and we had 1,200 comments, likes, and shares. Do you think this is good? I mean, compared with, what you guys see out there for our sector, it's pretty good, right? It's very good. We thought it was awesome. And, but this was before, so just look at the number, 58 reach, 1,000, 1,200 engagement. After we had the insight, this is one post, 3.4 something reach, 224,000 people engaged. This is enormous. This was the best performing post of anything we had ever done. The content of it talks about a father whose daughter was born with microcephaly, and it's about how he wants to help other families live with, live with microcephaly and understand microcephaly, and talks about their pregnancy, when he found out his wife was pregnant, and then when they got the news, and then about the plans they had as a family and how the plans change. But at the same time, what he is doing as a father, to make sure that his daughter has everything she needs and the mother has the support he needs. So, that she needs, excuse me. So, just looking comparatively, the one on the left was before insights, the one on the right with insights. This is what I mean if I say what the difference between having the right message to the right audience at the right time. And this would have been impossible to do without digital listening and without really being able to look at the data and assess it accordingly. Yes. Edwin, do you mind speaking on the mic so people can hear? I think you may have to turn it on. There's like a little switch there. Yeah.
Looks like it was already on. And let me know if you'd rather we hold questions.
Yeah, sure.
But I was curious because we have this issue come up a lot where it sounds like you had a really good message and an interesting story from that father. Did you work to back that up with content, say, on the website so people could go deeper? Because sometimes you find that because the content tends to be easier to create on a case-by-case basis, for social media that you might not always have a depth there that allows people to go further, and that may be unique to my experiences, but I'm curious whether there was a content plan as well.
Yeah, no, and it's a very good question about content planning. And again, in the interest of time, I showed you one post, but this was really part of a series of posts and of content that were combined, of course, with information we had on our site, and also with information we had or that we referred to in terms of going to the Ministry of Health's own web content, which was really high quality. So this was one of several. The vast majority of our posts had links to, learning more. But this is the way I answer your question, is that everything I shared to you now with you so far had to do with how we used it at UNICEF to do our work, right? And then some feedback for us. But I'm still, in a way, in showing you this post, and even in trying to answer your question, Edwin, I'm still within the UNICEF bubble. So we did better. But how did that help anybody who was worried about Zika, is the question, right? So here's the answer. So Facebook also has the ability to do surveys. This is on them. We cannot do this on our own. They did this, and they went on and asked people a few questions, but these are two of the key ones. One was, have you heard that UNICEF is working to limit the spread of Zika? And what you see on the 36% are the people who were exposed to our content, meaning, and the 7% is the how much more. So in other words, 7%, 29% will be the answer of people who were in the control group. So there was a 7% increase in this answer, and in being the answer yes, by people who were exposed to our content. So 36% of those who were exposed to our content said that they had heard that we were working on this. And it was 7% more than people who had not been exposed to our content. On the right, of course, this has to do with intention. We cannot say, obviously, in the context of digital, whether people went on and did it, but intention of protecting themselves. The answer of our group, the unit people exposed to UNICEF content, was 82%, and it was a 3% increase from the control group. When we saw this as UNICEF, we're like, Facebook has said this was huge because they look at this data every day, and we don't realize, how, because the volume we're talking about and the lightness of touch on a medium like Facebook, where you look at posts, 100 posts a day or more, they said that this difference, the 3% increase and this is only a couple of months, of data, was really, really significant. So, and it was very encouraging in terms of the effectiveness of the message and exposing people to this message, sorry. So, if you allow me, I guess you will allow me, I will move to the other example that is a bit more lighthearted, and it happened, but the interesting thing is that this was happening almost at the same time, also starting from Brazil, and it pertains to the work we did around the Olympics. So what I showed you with the Zika posts, and Edwin's question particularly, I think, is particularly relevant about, what, was this like a light touch? Were people actually were you taking people further? It was a relatively light touch, from the perspective of digital engagement. We were trying to just reach more people and try to be effective at what we communicated. However, on this example that I'm going to show you, we were looking for a deeper form of engagement. And we were particularly trying to do something other than fundraising. I'm all for fundraising. UNICEF fundraises, 35 to 40% of its income, which is $6 billion a year, is from donors, private donors like us. So UNICEF fundraising, but that is not what we were trying to do here. In Brazil, to get people to pay, what we call here in the States, pay to play, it's still not, it's not that ripe in terms of, getting people to participate in something by paying or by donating is still not super effective. I mean, of course, there are successful fundraising initiatives in Brazil, and UNICEF does it. But we were really looking, can we explore other ways by which we could engage people that doesn't necessarily require to ask them for money? So we are now back in Brazil, and we are now in what I'm going to describe happened between July and September. And in fact, the Zika crisis had really affected us and Brazil in general. You know, Brazil was really trying to put the best foot forward with the Olympics. It was the first time the Olympics were being held in Brazil and in South America, so it was a huge deal for the country. And dispel, you know, concerns about safety and you know, public health safety and other kinds of safety, and make sure that people will come to the country to cheer on their teams, etc. So we were there, and for a year or more, we thought, how can we do something around the Olympics that will engage people on children's rights, trying to leverage those Olympic values of fair play, you know, that everybody gets to be a part of, that, you know, that of fair competition, and really think of ways by which children's rights and children's rights to sport, access to sport, and the importance of sports in a child development could be things that we could bring people on board. So we designed an initiative that we called Team UNICEF, Get Active for Children, that was launched globally out of Brazil about 2 weeks before the Olympics started. And this is what it entailed. It was around, when I say a 3-month engagement journey, is because that's how long we kept this initiative going. So from late July through late September. So we asked people to join. People needed to have a mobile phone, essentially. They were asked to join a website called Team UNICEF, you know, and they could join through just, you know, by logging in there, or by doing it on Facebook, via Facebook, like, you know, it's very common today. But again, this was 2 years ago. And once they joined, they had to synchronize one of the exercise apps that they already used. And see, I'm saying we did not develop an app. Very, very important. We did not develop an app. We asked people to synchronize one of 8, I'm just showing 3 there, but one of 8 commercially available exercise apps. At the time, there were about 20 million people using exercise apps worldwide. And it's important that I say that, you know, in countries that are not the US, and particularly in developing countries, wearables are expensive. So to wear a Fitbit or whatever, Apple Watch or one of those, it's not that accessible. So a lot of people rely on exercise apps to exercise, you know, excuse me, the redundancy. So what we're telling people is, you have an exercise app, sync it with Team UNICEF, and if you don't, then download one and sync it. And then, once you did that, move. And what we ask people to do, and literally when they synced, a counter will appear on the Team UNICEF website where they could see the distance that they had gone. And once they completed 5K, that was the mission, complete 5K by walking, running. It could be done on a wheelchair, not on bicycle, but yes, on wheelchair. And you could do it all at once. You could do it over several days. You will have unlocked a donation to UNICEF. Which was, you know, 5 reais, which, you know, you could think of it as $5, although in value was about $1.8. So again, we didn't ask people for money. We asked them to move, to exercise, and then we were unlocking a donation. And then, and only then, after they did that, we told them, after you complete the 5K, it's not over. There is more you can do. And it actually became a competition where people were accumulating points. And the way they did that was by continuing to move, and the website will record, you know, their activity, because again, it was synced with the exercise apps they had on their phones that, of course, compute this information. So they could continue exercising and accumulating points, but back to what Edwin was asking me before, they could also learn more, you know, by answering quiz on children's rights issues, and particularly on issues of violence against children. And they could also give. We did ask people, you know, we are UNICEF, we did that if they wanted to give, they could also earn points by giving. right? And people, as they moved on, they started getting earning badges, which are the things you see on the right. And it became a competition. And the first 500 people, on the score earned prizes. So what happened? So we we launch this thing, fanfare, awesome, this is great, lots of people are doing it. And we see that a lot of people are joining. However, many were not synchronizing. So we start looking, and this, what I'm explaining now, it's classic CRM. It's classic customer relationship management. If you talk to people who work in credit cards or any of these industries, this is their bread and butter, but it was not bread and butter for UNICEF. And I had the good sense of hiring a very diverse team, and I had on the team somebody who worked for American Express globally, for whom this is like, of course, we have to do this. We need to see where are people getting stuck in their journey. And so we realized that many people, they had signed up, but they weren't synchronizing. So what do? We contact them, because now we have their information, right? Now they've registered, and we say, awesome, good job, you're amazing, you have registered. Now all you have to do is synchronize. Have you synchronized? Are you having troubles? And we did a very clear step-by-step. This information was on the site, but people were not doing it. So the answer is not, it's on the site. The answer is go and figure out why they're not doing it and try to address it. So now we send emails explaining step-by-step how do you download and synchronize with your app. The result of this was that 55% of all the people who registered actually successfully synchronized after we sent the email. And I'm going to come back to this number in a second. Then we're like, problem solved. No, because many people had synchronized, but they weren't moving. So it's like, why did you synchronize? Why are you not moving? So what we do, again, classic CRM. This is not cutting edge stuff. It's cutting edge for our sector. We go and say, why? Awesome. You have synchronized. Now all you have to do is move. And by then, we knew which app they synchronize with. So Edwin will get an email saying, you have Nike Plus. This is how you synchronize with Nike Plus. And Jackie got a different email saying, you have Runtastic. This is how you synchronize with Runtastic. So we could also target people specifically through the app they used. The result, 66% of people actually went on and started moving. And what's more impressive is that of those who started moving, 93% completed the action. So once they started moving, doing 5K was really not the problem. All one day, over several days, and further, over 80% continued on, which was not the ask. The ask was do 5K and unlock the donation. But over 80% went on and did it. What I wanted, and I know I'm giving you a lot of numbers, but the one number that I really wanted you to memorize, if possible, or not memorize, but retain, perhaps for a few minutes, is that our email open rates for these emails that I just described were over 40%. Do you know what's the industry average of open rates? 17. Yes, 15, 17, that's pretty good, for our sector. And we're nonprofit, so we're better, much, much better than commercial sectors, because, we do good. And so more people open our emails. Ours were over 40%. So clearly we had a very captive audience, but we were also delivering the right content at the right time that was helpful to them. So there were quite a few insights for us, and one was definitely the need to course correct and to really recognize that action and engagement is a journey. And I, again, now putting my management hat on and saying, again, this most respectfully, I'm just going to talk about the organizations I worked on. This goes directly against organizational culture, because organizational cultures for most of us are you launch the shiny thing, and then 3 days later, you're on to the next thing. because that's management expects, and there are a million reasons why this happens. But what about the thing you just launched, and how are you going to make sure that the thing, succeeds? And that requires staying in the journey with your audience and really understanding what's working, what's not working, and how you can best address. So that was, as much as the Zika example was an insight around the need to listen in order to craft messages and engage, this one was insight about the need to stay with your audience and understand what's working and what's not working for them. Because what we thought may have been easy, it wasn't that easy for some people. All right? So the result, was that it exceeded all of our expectations. We were hoping to have about 10,000 people participating. And I'm sorry, I should have clarified, when we launched this, we did launch it in 3 languages, Portuguese, Spanish, and English, because again, we are a global organization. We were working very closely with our colleagues from UNICEF all over the world. And many of them responded very positively. So we had people doing Team UNICEF in Pakistan. We had 7,000 people in Thailand doing Team UNICEF. It was crazy, really, really unexpected. And it was also thanks to the fact that we made it available in 3 languages. And we had participants from 145 countries.
Edith, can I ask you a question about that?
Yes. Dennis, do you mind just going on the mic so people can hear you? Yes. Yeah, you have to.
So my question about that is, did you go with the individuals who were already on a UNICEF list, and that's how you launched it? And do you have any idea about, did those people who already had a relationship with UNICEF, did they share this with their friends, and did you reach even more people because people were doing friendship-to-friendship kind of challenges and that sort of thing?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And I will say, no, it was by no means, our email list is really not our strength, and it wasn't really where we went. The way we disseminated this was primarily through social media, but we also use celebrities. UNICEF has really big name ambassadors, and in the interest of time, I won't be able to describe it a lot, but we did do promotional content and promotional videos with really top-tier celebrities. In the case of Brazil, basically the biggest entertainer and one of the biggest actors, who promoted this thing from the get-go. So the way we went about it was mostly using influentials, using social media, and yes, there was a lot, I would say much more than people within our UNICEF world, there was a lot of people telling their friends to join. Because this is a social thing for a lot of people. We went to races, street races, personally went, and put a stand there and told people about it. I'll never forget, because I was in one race, we put a UNICEF stand. It was a 10K, a street race. And before the race, we just started approaching people because everybody had their phones. Because everybody, if you are into running or walking or whatever, you do like to compute how much you've done, right? How much you've moved. So we went and explained it beforehand, as many people as we could reach. And most said, yes, sure, we'll do it. You're going to do a 10K anyway. Why don't you do it for children? At the end, there we did it too. Some of us, more or less elegantly, but finished. I stopped at 5K and went back to my tent. But then, now people finish. And what was most impressive to me is that how many people approached us at the end and said, "Okay, I'm done. So what's next?" And that was really a very strong sign. I think, I will say both the fact that they were inviting others to join, but also the fact that they wanted to do more. Yes.
Messaging about prizes? Do you feel like that was a motivation for people?
So it's a very good question. She's asking whether there were messages about prizes. No, until you did 5K, because we wanted to keep it clean. And so you knew nothing about competition or prizes until you did your 5K. Once you did your 5K, you got a message congratulating you with your badge. And now you're part of this club, that is going to do the competition. And people got really serious about it. And we had a parallel one for just UNICEF staff. Oh my gosh, which of course not competing with people were really, really serious about the competition, but they only knew after they had completed the 5K. So now, yes.
Last question about the fundraising. I know that wasn't the primary goal, but they were unlocking that whatever.
Okay.
I'm assuming that was linked to a existing
Yes, sorry, and
pot,
that's
but yeah, if there was additional revenue that was generated.
Thank you, Lana. That's a very important point. So there's two things about fundraising. One is we secured private funding, corporate support, which is how these unlocking, mechanisms work. So we got two private sector partners to back it up, right? And so you have to have the funds secured if you're going to make this promise to people. But the other insight is that, as remember I said that one of the things people could do to accumulate points and win prizes was donating. We only had about 300 people giving. So of, 34,000 participating, and I think it was 13,000 or so who finished everything, and only 300 or so giving, which was insightful for us. I will say not terribly surprising, but still insightful and humbling, because it really speaks to, the challenges of fundraising. And for us was just a test, because it was not the primary purpose of this activity. So now I wanted to see if you could, if we could reflect together about, where could this go? I've shared an example, and I talk about the Zika as a one-off, mostly because, we were, again, trying to touch people with one post or two posts, and not expecting that they will see more than that. With the UNICEF, Team UNICEF, Get Active for Children, we were trying to engage people over a 3-month period or so. But now that is still episodic. So how do you move to something that is more sustained? Enters behavior design. So the disclaimer is I am not a behavior scientist. I'm somebody who is looking at this problem and challenge of engagement and inevitably, and really from our sector as an advocate, as a communicator, as an evaluator, and looking at where are we getting stuck and why. And so I arrive at behavior science, and luckily for me, many years ago, I went to Stanford, where there is a very strong behavior science expertise. And I come across this behavior model that is by B.J. Fogg, who is a Stanford professor. He's one of the most well-known behavior scientists around. B.J. has been working on behavior redesign for 20 years. And what's particularly relevant about him is that he works at the intersection of technology and behavior design. And he's really focused on the influence that technology has on persuasion. B.J. Fogg is also considered one of the most influential behavioral designers in the Silicon Valley, and has mentored many of the people who have gone on and created Instagram and other tools that many of us now use addictively. That is not his purpose in life. He's a behavior scientist. But to say that the models that he used, and like it or not, and we can debate that, but the fact that these tools, social media tools, are so addictive is because these companies really understand behavior design. And so my call to our sector is that so should we. And do it in a way that I think is different than they do it. And by they, I mean the social media company, where it's very obscure and non-transparent, the way in which we're being manipulated into becoming addictive. But the science matters, and this is a little bit of what I wanted to share with you. So BJ came up with this model that it's not the only behavior model around, but what's important about it is that it's very simple, and that I can explain it in 2 minutes. Which, if you like to time me, I can do, I usually use I write this, but in consideration of people online, I wrote it on the PowerPoint. And the behavior model says that for behavior to occur, 3 things have to happen at the same time. People have to have motivation. They want to do the behavior. They have to have the ability to do it. It has to be something that they feel able to do. And they have to be prompt or triggered, meaning we have to ask them, something needs to trigger them into doing it or prompt them into doing it. So it's behavior happens where motivation, ability, and a prompt come together at the same time. We could look at motivation, on a scale of being highly motivated to not being particularly motivated. And we could look at ability as hard to do, all the way from hard to do to easy to do. And remember, this is what is easy for me may be very hard for David, and what's very easy for David, it could be very difficult for me. Don't you write poems? What is the thing what is it called?
I write satirical songs. Is that what you're thinking of?
That's what I was thinking, yeah. So he writes satirical songs, and it is something that I really will have no skill whatsoever. It will be very, very difficult. If you put me with David, it will be very, very difficult. Now, if we were to have a salsa dancing competition, I suspect that it will be very easy for me to do and very difficult for David, although I don't know. Am I right? So it's important, but this for us as advocates, and from this is the insight here is that it has to do with how easy or difficult is for them, not for us. The audience is the people you're trying to engage. So think that if you were, I don't know, doing a fundraiser for a dog rescue project, and you come across, Lana, and she loves dogs, and so she's highly motivated. She really believes in the importance of rescuing dogs. And you ask her for, $50, and she gives. You ask her, she gives, she's motivated, she thinks it's an important cause. $50, okay, it's okay, I can do it. Now, if you ask someone else who may not necessarily, be that into dog rescue, but, you're asking $5, so you make it easier, and, I'm motivated enough, okay, it sounds okay, even if it's not my cause, I will give. When you prompt me, I will give. However, if you find someone who is not that into dog rescue, not particularly, is not their thing, and you ask them for $100 or $200, they're not gonna give. And certainly, if you find somebody who hates dogs, and on top of that, you ask them, I don't know, $50, then you're definitely not gonna get the behavior. So the model basically describes everything there is basically an action line. So everything that happens above the action line, the right combination of motivation and ability are what will prompt behavior. And if you don't have the right combination, then you have this issue of the behavior not occurring, either because the motivation wasn't high enough or because you didn't make it easy enough. So for us advocates and practitioners to really, once we design an action, to ponder, even if I realize many of us, we may not know this, but to wait a moment and ponder, how motivated are people, when I put out this action, and we nonprofits get it in the sense that, the midterms come out there, communicating about the midterms because people, are hopefully gonna be more motivated or pay more attention to it, because there is an event and you have to go vote. So let's do it and let's hope that people are motivated. So we do tend to go through calendars that have to do with external events. But does that mean people are motivated? I don't know. And that's something that we really need to consider. Whether, the calendars that we used for activations respond to people's motivations. So if I were to ask you for the Zika example, where would you put, in terms of what we did, where would you put, and people did say they were going to take action, so that's the information we have. But where would you put it on that chart, the Zika example, more or less, in terms of motivation and ability? What we were asking people to do, we're asking people to protect themselves, using mosquito nets and taking out the trash and other things. Where do you think they were?
It's pretty highly motivated.
Pretty highly motivated.
But not necessarily super easy.
Not necessarily super easy, exactly. So it's, the motivation was high because this was about protecting themselves and their families. And we saw it because of the digital data showed us that lots of people were talking about and were concerned. And the ability, it's arguable, but definitely some of the things that people were asked to do were not easy to do in terms of, making sure there were no water reservoirs anywhere, stagnant water in their households, disposing the trash correctly, which not always, there is trash collection in some of these cities. So a lot was put on people themselves. What about the Team UNICEF? Where would you put that? The Get Active example.
It looks like it's relatively easy. It wasn't a big initial ask, except insofar as people got stuck, as you said they did, either not syncing or not downloading or not syncing or not doing. So relatively low motivation until you could really connect it to kids.
Right. And so this one, we know it was above the action line, so I'm going to put it, somewhere there, meaning, middle motivation, it was the Olympics, UNICEF, has got a strong brand, and the ability, precisely, we made it easier. So it was easy for some who already had the apps, who knew how to do it, were very accustomed with technology. It was not nearly easy enough for people who had never downloaded an exercise app and were, confused with the process, but we made it easier. So that's also something you can course correct along the way. So this behavior model goes a step further, and this is sort of the last insight I want to leave you with, before we start our conversation, is that designing and planning an action based on motivation is a terrible way to go. And it is what most of us do. I'm going to speak for myself, in the sense that we hope and we rely on people being highly motivated to take action. Again, back to the example of the midterms. And sometimes, certainly, it works, when you get people in a high motivating moment. Look at New Year's resolutions. That's a perfect example of things that fail because you're highly motivated on January 1st. Well, I am. And not so much 2 months later. So motivations come and go with the wind. It doesn't mean you need to know, you need to understand, and definitely if you see that there is an opportunity where people are going to be highly motivated, like for instance, the separation of children at the border. That was a moment where people were highly motivated to act. Never have I seen, never, my Facebook timeline so full of people taking action that I had never seen publicly taking a stand. Particularly parents, I'm a parent of a young child, and people, in my community taking action saying, this is not our country, that we are separating children at the border. People were highly motivated by that. Can you keep up that motivation? It's very high. It's very difficult. So BJ Fogg looks at this and says, okay, but so if you have motivation, you need ability and you need the prompt. So if we were to design motivation out of this, could we think of helping people acquire behaviors by making them very, very easy? And by making them very, very easy, giving people the confidence of success, because there is nothing worse than trying a behavior and failing in terms of our own self-confidence and feeling of self-efficacy. Wouldn't it be better to start small with incremental steps to help people acquire the confidence that they can actually do the behavior, and from there adopt larger, more complicated behavior? And here is where his approach called tiny habits come from. So it's not so much that motivation should be completely ruled out, but what if we design a method by which people can acquire habits in a way that motivation is not the key factor? And you could do that by making it simple. And this is what the tiny habits approach does. So this is a method by which they being BJ Fogg and his team, helping people acquire habits that are very, very easy to do, and which I think is particularly relevant for our work. And I'll show you why. A tiny habit essentially is something that you will do once a day. So it's something simple enough that you will do once a day, that will take you less than 30 seconds, that will require little effort, and more importantly, that is prompted by existing habits. So remember how you have to have motivation, ability, and prompt. So with tiny habits, what is being proposed is that motivation, not the key factor. Let's make the ability very, very easy. But then what's the prompt? You know, how are we going to be triggered into doing the action? What if the prompt were our existing habits, things that we already do? And I'll quickly show you a couple of examples of tiny habits. The tiny habits now have had, you know, they've been around a few years. There's been, I think, over 100,000 people who've taken part on this program, which is free. And about 90%, you know, report success in their ability to acquire habits, new habits. I've acquired about 6 new habits doing this. And these are examples of successful habits that people are acquiring. So the peeing one is the most successful tiny habit. So if you're interested in having big arms or muscular arms or whatever, you might want to consider this. It's the most successful tiny habits of all. But you see, what the first part of the sentence, the first part of the recipe is what you already do. So the brilliance of this is how about thinking of things that people already do? Like in the team UNICEF, we did that in a way where like, well, a lot of people already exercise and they're already using exercise apps. We had no idea of tiny habits, but we sort of came to it in a different way. And so asking them to exercise for children, for those people who already do it, is not that big of an ask, right? And to that, so the prompt and the trigger is something you already do. And what you see on the right is the new habit. So if you were adapting this or thinking of this for our world and our sector, and this is all something that I'm putting out there and something I'm working on as we speak, as a way to say, okay, can habit acquisition be something that we as our sector look into in a way that we give to people, you know, the ability for themselves to figure out how they want to act and which habits they want to acquire pertaining to the issues that we work on, being the oceans or being something else. And so what can we learn from this? So the first thing is consider easy behaviors. And you know, certainly many of our organizations already know that, particularly the ones who do fundraising. You know, when you ask people to donate $1, $5 a month, is because you're trying to go, you know, the easy way and do things that people won't find difficult. Or when you ask somebody to sign a petition or click here, you know, those are easy behaviors. But if you were to look at them from the perspective of your audience, then this is where social media comes in. You know, with all the love-hate we may hear for social media, it does present with opportunities for making things much easier for people. So Facebook fundraisers, for instance, I don't know how many of you, can you just raise your hands if you have launched a fundraiser on Facebook, or if you have donated to a friend through a fundraiser, through a Facebook fundraiser? Yeah, so it's about 60% or 50-60% here. So Facebook has started doing giving people the ability to fundraise not that long ago. It has skyrocketed. And Nonprofit Tech for Good released a report last week looking at social media in our sector and saying that Facebook fundraisers are basically going to transform the way we fundraise. Because if you have not used it, it's incredibly easy. I was posting the other day an article about UNICEF, something UNICEF was doing pertaining to the separation of children at the border, but I was posting an article. I wasn't doing a fundraising ad, but because the article was about UNICEF's work at the border, it immediately Facebook offered me the possibility to fundraise for UNICEF, which I said, okay, click, and next thing I know, I raised $500. So the easiness is something really for us to consider. But lastly, the issue of understanding our audience's habits. So to really think about what we're asking people to do, much less from our organizational calendar's perspectives, and much more from the perspective of people's lives and habits and what it is that they do in a way that, you know, could make sense to them. So to wrap it up, because I know we started a little bit late, so I wanted to wrap it up for those online in particular, saying that the work that I'm doing now is looking into, could we take the control over how people act, and I call it act generously, act altruistically, from organization and giving it to people and helping people individually acquire the habits they want to acquire. And the examples I showed are for tiny habits are very much about oneself, right? Your personal improvement. But what if we could help people acquire habits that will make them more altruistic, more generous, and helping others, using this methodology. So this is what I wanted to bring to you today, and I hope it was helpful. This is just a summary of the 3 things we discussed today. So to engage, we need to really listen, and we have a lot of tools by which we can listen today, particularly digitally. To sustain the engagement, we have to realize we have to be in the journey with our audiences and figure out what's working or not for them. But if we want to do it right from the start, I believe that we have to really take into consideration our audience's motivations and ability and consider starting small. All right, there you go.
Great. Edith, thank you. And I hope you can all see, as we did, 12 years ago, the talent and foresightedness that Edith brings to her work, has always brought to her work, and is, you're staying ahead of the curve once again, and thank you for bringing us along with you. If I can ask folks around the table to use one of the mics, they're all live, just pull one off the stand or pull it close to you as you ask questions, or we can move one around for you. Any questions for Edith? I'm going to turn it back to her to moderate.
So I know it was a lot of content in a relatively short time, but I really wanted to bring you those examples and I say, let's discuss, but please, and I'm around and I'm reachable in many ways. You can come to my husband's restaurant in Brooklyn, but you do not have to, although it is very good. But I just want to kind of hear your thoughts, reflection, comments, questions. Dennis, who's from Spitfire Strategy, who's worked a lot on activation, has a lot of experience. Yes, and yeah, you need the mic.
Thank you. Hi, I don't have my name tag, but I'm Hope Randall from PATH's Defeat Diarrheal Disease Initiative. I was curious about the Zika example. You mentioned on Twitter that a lot of people were looking to the Ministry of Health for information. Wondered if you had any insights on where people were looking at the Zika information on Facebook or trying to access that.
Yeah, no, thank you. And that's a very good example, a very good question. And one thing I can say, and this is public in the sense that it was out there for whoever wanted to see it. The Ministry of Health was extremely effective on Twitter. It was struggling a lot on Facebook because politics, not unlike us here, play a very, very big role in Brazil. And there was a lot of opposition to the federal government and distrust of the federal government. And therefore, Facebook, because the comment that the posts from the Ministry of Health were getting were really, really derailing their messages. So as much as they were putting quality stuff out there, what people were commenting on was completely co-opting, the conversation about Zika and what they were trying to do. So we, as UNICEF, proved to be a better, a more credible source on this particular issue on Facebook, but also traditional media. It should be said. Traditional media in Brazil was playing a big role, doing a lot of public information campaigns about Zika, both on TV, but also using their own Facebook channels. And traditional media, meaning the big TV networks, are still huge in Brazil and very dominant. So you had the government, you had organizations like us, and then you had traditional media communicating. Yes.
Hi. So we have a lovely question from somebody who is watching the live stream. So Jamie asks, if the Zika crisis was happening today in 2018, what might you do differently based on today's social media, but also the behavioral science things you've been studying? Just anything else you might add to what you've already shared, smiley face.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. That's a very good question. And so it was, what would we do differently? You know, if I was now with the benefit of hindsight, you know, and I would say, I will do the same from the perspective of using digital listening and listen before talking. What I will do differently is trying to have a much better understanding of people's habits. For example, which day is trash collected in, you know, São Paulo or Recife or wherever, and time my posts to the day before the trash collection. Because, you know, we didn't think of that. You know, we were putting out there good information, but if you're driving and you're in the middle of the week and your trash comes only on the weekends, you saw that post and off it went. So what I would have done differently is I would have thought of people's habits and asked and understood, you know, what time do they take the trash out? When do they have collection systems or not? You know, where, and I would have made posts, I would have crafted posts as simple as, you know, put your mosquito repellent next to your moisturizer on the counter of your bathroom, literally. You know, understand people's morning routines. And of course, we're all different, but with that mentality and saying, you know, before you leave the bathroom, you know, have your mosquito repellent right by the door of your bathroom. So that's what I would have done differently. I would have tried to understand people's habits and incorporate that in my digital communication better. Yes, and then Bridget.
Hi, is this on? Josh Joseph with the Pew Trust. So just looking at your in sum there and what you just said, it strikes me that where you say under sustained engagement, figure out what's not working for them and address it, that really you're kind of saying that in the design phase. You're really thinking about what the barriers are, right? The potential barriers, even in advance, or reasons that stuff may not have worked for people in the past. And that's kind of another way to make it easy, right? You look at the barrier, you say, this is going to get in the way. How do we minimize or at least, make smaller those things that are getting in the way?
Absolutely. I mean, I would say that to me would have been another lesson learned, particularly in the second example with the Team UNICEF activation, is that while, you know, we did think that our design, during the design phase, we consulted, we tested, we had prototypes, we tested, we revised, clearly it was insufficient. What we did in terms of, once we deployed, you know, our initiative, you know, people were struggling, and we didn't really fully understand where they will get stuck and how, despite what we thought was a very good attempt at the design phase to test, prototype, test, revise, test, before we launched it. Yeah.
If I could just add one thing. Like, I think listening to what you're saying and the way that you've sort of summarized it here, you've said in a really accessible way what most of the evaluation field says in a really complex and terrible way about what theory of change actually is. Right. It's kind of figuring out what your problem is and what the barriers are and how to make them easier. Right. But we don't say that very
And I would
clearly.
just add, from an organizational perspective, again, for those of you in management or who plan to be in management, it has also to do with really taking yourself off the center. I mean, we're just so inward looking as a field and sector, and I really don't mean this in a negative way, just to really try to be constructively critical of what I have seen, is that we need to launch this, we need to put this out, this is very important, if only people knew. But, you know, when in fact, what will show effectiveness is looking at it completely the opposite way, you know, which is really starting from those you're trying to engage.
Hi, thanks. I mean, equally, I think it's really helpful having this set out so simply and kind of in steps that you can take. I guess my question is about, I can see how this can work for something like Zika, where there's a public health interest and a personal interest, but how does it apply to other less immediate issues? And this point on, as things get easier, they also get more quantity, more volume. So how do you tackle the issue of saturation and just feeling you're clicking loads of petitions or whatever, but really feel that you're having an impact or being selective and choosing issues that matter to you?
Thank you, and that's a great question. And I mean, I think I can partly answer by saying one thing about easiness is I do want to say what I'm recommending and suggesting is that we look at things that are accessible in an incremental way. So it's not so much, so sign the petition and then sign another petition, but it's really where are you, what is the journey you're trying to take your audience into? So for those of us working on policy advocacy, so where are we moving our audiences towards? Are we trying to get, and that is where the habit design enters. Because one thing is if we're trying to get people to do the same thing over and over, I think we sort of know how we do that, and we know 8% are going to do it based on the data, and we could be satisfied. Or we could look at, okay, how do I move, this group of people from petition signers into advocates? And how does that happen? And to do that is where I think behavior design comes in. So I think what could make an organization distinct from the crowd is that while your petition, may look like everyone else's, you're actually consciously taking people through a journey that then the next time is going to ask something a bit more difficult and more, or more engaged, but that it takes into consideration how they are responding to each of these things and their habits towards a larger level of engagement. That's how I would think of it. Thank you. Yes, Edwin?
I would just echo my colleague Josh's comment that this is very clear and easy to understand. So I'd love to take it back to my staff, many of whom are probably stuck in snowdrifts and couldn't make it, but just I'm wondering if you're going to share the slides. And then a second question is, you mentioned listening, and while I think it would be wonderful to have these relationships with Facebook, I'm curious if you or anyone around the table use listening tools specifically. That's something that we're exploring right now.
Yeah. Now this is, so regarding the presentation, David?
We would be delighted to share the slides, at least to our listserv and also via our website. Suzanne, I think we can post them there. Edith, thank you for allowing us to share it. And just a quick comment as you're searching before before you respond to Edwin's question. Josh's question also prompted a sense that this is like doing what you were describing in terms of understanding the barriers to change is like doing a pre-mortem in the way we've talked about that, as trying to understand the many ways that something can fail in advance. So you're not doing a post-mortem afterwards, you're doing it in advance. And in effect, that's, I think, what you're talking about in terms of trying to understand the ways people can engage. It is challenging to me to translate this into the kinds of evolution from a user to an engaged user to, as many organizations say, to bringing them up to where they're a champion for that cause or for the advocacy issue. So answer Edwin's question if you would, and then if you can talk a little bit, if you have some cases where you've seen that happen, where people have used this incremental change pattern to move towards really championing an issue. I think a lot of eyes will light up around the room and online.
So in terms of the tools, the only thing I'll say, I can definitely follow up with you. I was just looking at my notes here on this, because there are a lot of tools out there. You're right that, and I'm glad you brought it up, that the access we had to work with Facebook and Google was really unique and extraordinary, and it really made me concerned because it made me realize how ineffective I was the rest of the time when I don't have this information. And so it's very humbling, and this is a whole other session about Facebook and how it works and how many people actually see your posts, and it's an uphill climb, to say the least. The only positive thing I have to say is A, this happened, B, it can happen again, and C, we were actually, so everything you've seen around those dark posts and the Russian meddling and all of that, when I saw that, I was like, oh, but I did the same thing, but I did it for a good reason. So in other words, we were using that intelligence and we were targeting people specifically, because that part I didn't have time to explain, specifically we were targeting people specifically on their interest. So But I was very innocent about it, thinking this is great, you know. And then a couple of years later, I was like, oh, so were the Russians and all these other, you know, realizing that this is actually something you can use for not great means, but you can still use it for doing very good things. So that said, there are tools out there, and I would just say they divide it in two groups. Social media tools for listening they are one group of tools if you want to listen to conversations, and a different group of tools are for monitoring how your brand is performing, which, you know, for many organizations is important. So Edwin, I can follow up with you because I have quite a few names, but I'm just going to bring two. I think one good for monitoring your brand, your organization, is called Social Bakers. Social Bakers, and because it integrates all the platform into one, so you can see how you're performing across Instagram, Facebook, etc., LinkedIn, etc. And for listening, I'm, you know, people I know who I trust, you know, have been using lately one called Brandwatch, Talkwalker, and one called Sprinkler. So Talkwalker, Brandwatch, and Sprinkler. But I can follow up with those of you who are interested in more specifically. Okay, and I know we are on time. And David, I will end by saying that I think I don't have an example of somebody who's taken this. I think this is really, I think it's all, I think, relatively new, who have taken this and applied it to their work. I think certainly the fundraising field, because they have to raise money, have you know, applied a lot of behavior, some I would say behavior design techniques from the perspective of, you know, making people to opt out, and that's why you become a donor, and then you forget you became a donor, and that thing just keeps going on your credit card every month. So some of, you know, I think the fundraising field is very good at that. But what I'm proposing is for the advocacy world and the communication world, you know, and the program world to really consider this, you know, much, much deeper. And I think that's still something that we're prompt to do, hopefully.
Well, thank you, Edith. Thank you, as always, for being ahead of the curve. And as I said before, bringing us along with you in our conversation today. So let's have a round of applause, please, for Edith. And we've already seen some nice clapping hands icons on the live stream. So you're in there already, Edith, dear to our collective hearts. So thank you again. And folks, if you can hang around a little bit longer, we have the room for a bit longer, I think. So mingle and talk. And contact Edith at...
Yes. No, I was just going to say my information is there. And by all means, if you'd like to exchange cards, I'm here. But thank you, guys. Thank you for coming and for participating.
Thank you, my dear. Good job.
Yeah, I got it a little later.
It's great stuff. It is, as I said, forward-looking. And there's a